Can I please acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present and any Indigenous persons with us this morning. It's always good coming at the end of such a great panel because I think most of the issues, the deeper political issues, have already been canvassed, which gives me an opportunity, apart from addressing the failures of neoliberalism in the provision of quality education in 8 minutes that I've got left, to talk about also what can be done and what needs to be done in order to progress this discussion into that action phase. We've become very good as the left in describing problems. I reckon we do so well at describing problems, but what we fail to do, and I think we need to look at ourselves, what we fail to do is articulate those policies, those strategic responses in order to take advantage of the objective conditions in which we find ourselves in order to make progress to achieve some of those important goals that we set for ourselves. In 2008, indeed, just as a description of that, in 2008, indeed, with the collapse with the global financial crisis, a number of us, I remember, were involved in conversations saying clearly the failures of neoliberalism having been exposed, we will now see the dawning of a new paradigm where there'll be greater respect and decency for working people and community and the like. Well, it didn't happen because capitalism reinvented itself so quickly and in a way that very few of us were able to predict, and hence we find ourselves in many respects even further behind where we may have been in 2008. And just to illustrate that, it happened right before our eyes. I'm just going to use one statistic, if I may, with respect to some global data. As you know, in the year 2000, the United Nations adopted the Millennium Development Goals, and they set themselves a number of goals, one of which was quality, ensuring quality basic education for all the world's children by the year 2015. Whilst we've made a lot of gains with respect to that goal, we still nonetheless have today, with 1,000 days to go before the expiration of the Millennium Development Goals, 61 million children around the world who are being denied access to basic education. It's been calculated that to achieve that, or the resources necessary to achieve that basic entitlement, are somewhere in the order of $16 to $20 billion. Now here's the statistic in terms of the global financial crisis. The year after those profits of neoliberalism brought the global financial crisis upon us all, and many people around the world are still paying the price for that, ordinary people paying the price for it. Those very same Wall Street bankers, the year afterwards, gave themselves bonuses to the tune of $16 billion, bonuses of $16 billion, which would be enough to achieve the Millennium Development Goal of every child across the world being given access to education. So that's the type of stuff we're up to in terms of their reinvention and their capacity to reinstall the fundamentals of capitalism to continue the profits that they accrue to themselves at the expense of the many. Last week I was at an international forum, and I just want to use this as some context and I'll come back. I think it's all related to the topic anyway. I was at an international forum. The UN is organising forums around the world as part of a consultation as they prepare themselves for the post-2015 development goals. And I was there as part of a delegation with our Global Union Federation, Education International, and also the International Trade Union Council of the World, where we sought to achieve at least a reflection of some of our demands in the post-2015 goals, because thus far the United Nations has given no commitment to include references to education as a priority for post-2015, nor references to the fundamentals of a genuine participatory society apart from education, namely in the form of decent employment conditions and decent living conditions. Unless we achieve globally and domestically an acknowledgement that there are certain fundamental pillars of democracy, namely high quality education for all, decent work conditions and decent living conditions, we will not be able to achieve what we consider as absolutely necessary for a thriving democracy. Which brings me back to Australia. What we've seen over the last 25 years in Australia is an embrace of education policies which are located within the realm of market principles. Neoliberalism has prevailed as the overriding orthodoxy with respect to the development of education policy in Australia, such that with a combination of flawed and continuing failing funding policies, what we've seen in Australia is now one of the most segregated schooling systems in the world, and one which therefore is contributing to inequality in the provision of education and therefore a growing segregation of education opportunity and a deepening inequality in educational attainment. We stand at the forefront of the world in terms of this most disappointing statistic. That's where we've come as a result of 20 years of policy by successive state and federal governments. It took an inquiry called the Gonski Review, which everyone knows about, and Gonski having become a noun, a verb, an adjective, a state of mind for some of us. It took that review to start to bring together and focus the attention of a broader section of society to understand that something has gone wrong. Gonski found, and we were vindicated indeed after 20 years of analysis as a result of it, found that the current funding arrangements are failing our kids and the nation as a whole. The current funding arrangements are contributing to that deepening inequality in provision and educational attainment, and as I said, manifesting itself in widening achievement gaps. We have a 2 to 3 year achievement gap between advantaged and disadvantaged kids in this country. We have a 2 to 3 year achievement gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous kids. A 2 to 3 achievement gap between kids in rural settings compared to urban settings. And if you look at the stats by year 9, a 5.5 year achievement gap between the top 20% of the year 9 cohort and the bottom 20% of the year 9 cohort. We are failing our kids dismally. Now, we've made some great gains over the last 2 years with respect to our public campaign and the public discourse that's emerged. But can I assure you, in these last few weeks, and indeed in the last few months leading up to a critical meeting of COAG, the Council of Australian Government, on April 19th, which will, I believe, define our future in terms of education for years to come, what we've seen is an incredible private pushback by the private school lobby. One thing that they're very good at is their private work and private efforts in order to ensure that they maintain positions of privilege and indeed extend privilege, as always happens within a market, as always happens within the context of neoliberalism and the application of market principles, because the market always extends privilege to the already privileged, such as its nature. So there's a massive pushback there in an attempt to deny the allocation of funding to address the needs of the most disadvantaged. Now, we're still continuing in our campaign efforts over the course, and certainly these last 2 weeks, with an intense campaign, putting the spotlight on Neanderthals such as Napthine and Newman and Bartlett and others across the country who are seeking to obstruct and bring down these campaign objectives. And can I just say that the Gonski outcome of schools funding reform is not an end in itself, but it's a means to an end. It's a means to an end because it might just give us some resources back to where they're needed most, so we can start reorganising and rebuilding, and then build a 10-year plan to reassert the centrality in the primaries of education, quality public education for all kids, to start breaking down the segregation that's all too apparent with respect to the provision of education in this country. Now, where to from here, and I don't know how long I've got to go, but we've got 3, luxury. Where to from here? I'm certainly looking forward this afternoon to hearing the comrade from Syriza to hear from them more directly how they managed to transform a movement that polled, because it was a movement at its inception that polled 3% in one election, and or was polling 3% before a particular election, and then got itself to a margin of approximately 27 to 29% vote in subsequent elections. A movement that consists of what are described as organisations embracing Marxism, other organisations embracing environmental politics and gender politics in terms of the feminist movement in Greece. I think we've got something to learn there. Clearly the objective conditions around the world vary from country to country, but it's certainly it's one of the rare examples globally of success that's been evading us as a global movement for decades. So I'm certainly looking forward to it. But what we need to do, meanwhile in Australia what we need to do, is recognise that, and I hope that this is part of the thesis that was evident in Greece, recognise the absolute need to build coalition, to build engagement and build alliances across our communities. Andrew is absolutely right about the central place of the union movement in building this, because the union movement, whilst it's not the union movement that it was some decades ago, nonetheless represents the organised voice of 2 million workers in Australia. We've got to use that and build that. And one thing that we have to do as the union movement is become much better at building community alliances, deeper, broader community alliances in order to start articulating a new vision for Australia. We made a big mistake with the union movement at the end of the Your Rights at Work campaign, because the union movement itself brought down that campaign. And that was acknowledged recently by David Oliver, and rightly so. We've got to reinvent and re-embrace an absolute commitment to social movement unionism across all of the across the ACTU and certainly the affiliates, because only when we engage more broadly beyond the immediate economistic views of some more conservative unions, only when we embrace that social movement unionism and reach out beyond our immediate interest, only then can we as the union movement contribute to building a broader community in order to tackle the fundamentals that continue to undermine decency in terms of the provision of quality education, decency in terms of living standards, and of course employment conditions. Thank you.